I was mentioning some of our guests tomorrow, and we expect doesn't always happen because sometimes he gets called away to other business. But early in the program tomorrow, we expect to visit a chat with Representative Raul Labrador. We also, as I mentioned, John Ransom, who's he's the economics and financial writer at townhall.com, as well as a syndicated talk show host. He's scheduled to join us just after 9 o'clock. He'll spend a few minutes with us talking about planning for your future. We will be joined as well between 8:30 and 9 o'clock by Dr. Jonathan Tripp from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls. Dr. Tripp, of course, he or one of his associates joins us every Wednesday morning. We have a conversation about medical issues, and you're free to chime in as well at 736-0300. We do want to point out, of course, the doctor is still looking for new patients at his office. And often, if you're a patient, they can see you. Unlike assembly line medicine, they don't say, well, come in 3 weeks. If you have an issue, a medical issue, they can generally see you on the same day you call early in the morning. And I'd like to remind you, life's too short not to feel good. Couple of notes I've got this morning that I wanted to share before we wrap up the program today. Some of you may still read newspapers or you read them online. You can check out my column today, which is about the upcoming runoff election in France. We had the election there with multiple candidates on Sunday, and the establishment candidates were all soundly defeated, which left the nationalist Marine Le Pen and then the media creation Emmanuel Macron as the last two candidates standing, and the media is telling you she doesn't stand a chance against this guy. You understand what's going on here. She is not a perfect candidate by no means. But I shared with you that quote yesterday about Winston Churchill from the late and great writer Christopher Hitchens, and it was this: the revisionist verdict, ruthless, boorish, manipulative, alcoholic, myopic, and wrong about almost everything, but he was right about the thing that mattered most. That was a quote from Hitchens about Churchill, who had a lot of bad ideas, but when it came to, actually, Franklin Roosevelt said of Churchill, he said he's got 100 ideas every day, and one or two of them are pretty good. Well, he was right about Adolf Hitler, is what the reference is from Hitchens, and that he had to be stopped. Marine Le Pen may be wrong about a lot of things, but the thing that matters most in France right now is the growing jihadi movement, and she is being just pummeled by the folks on the left and even in the establishment. Did you know that her opponent, Macron, he created this new political party out of whole cloth this past year, and then you wonder, how does this guy come from nowhere to finishing first in the first round of voting on Sunday and now being the favorite? I haven't seen it anywhere in mainstream media, but this morning I was doing some research on him. He was a banker in the Rothschild banking empire. In other words, the globalists are backing him. The big banks of Europe who would like to maintain the EU, that is the European Union. He is their guy. He came out of their offices. It is in their interest to back globalization and not nationhood. It is in their interest to maintain the status quo. And they're not concerned about migrants and refugees, who might some of them be violent. They're thinking cheap labor and more globalism. If we get the EU, and then we can expand into something even bigger and someday have one world government. These are the people who really call the shots around the world. The people who have the real power aren't necessarily all these government leaders. The reason that Putin is so despised by these people is because he gave them a kick in the pants. They thought after the fall of the Soviet Union they were going to come in and take over Russia. And after 5 or 6 years of that, he got the power away from his predecessor, and he said, no, it's not going to happen. The Chinese don't necessarily play ball with them either, although over the years that finance has become somewhat intertwined. But these people are your globalists who seek a worldwide global government. People like Nigel Farage and Donald Trump to some degree, although maybe not as much as was promised, and Marine Le Pen threatened that new world order. So they have to get her out of the way. So they found this guy, Macron, who was working in the offices. He was an investment banker with Rothschild, and they put him up and they backed his new political party, and he didn't get there from scratch. There had to be a lot of advertising money, big, big banking money behind him. Big, big dollars we're talking about, propping him up. Because if you look at the guy, he is the least offensive candidate to the most amount of people in France. Because he doesn't really, he says, well, he supports the EU and he just wants to love everybody. We'll all just get along if we continue with our values, which are what? Well, they're the new values of globalism that have supplanted the old French values. The church is dead, a dead institution in France, and really being French is a dead institution in France and has been since, as I said yesterday, 1871, if you go back that far. It's just a crying shame to see this thing happen when you realize what's really going on here. No, she's a flawed candidate, that's true, but thinking about that quote about Churchill, he was right about the thing that mattered most. So if you get a chance, check out my newspaper column today. That's in the Times News, or if you go to magicvalley.com. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 43. You can also find a link to that newspaper column if you go to our website today and check out something that I wrote called In France, A Voice in the Wilderness. And there's a link included to the newspaper column in that shorter piece. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We're at 42. Thank you for joining us this morning. Would you notice, it's not going to happen, I can't see it happening this week, but there was talk of a government shutdown. We had one 4 years ago, and you remember media blamed Ted Cruz and jumped up and down and said, little children couldn't get into the Smithsonian and war veterans were blocked from visiting the World War II Memorial. Turns out, of course, the Obama White House on purpose selected certain places to make it amenable to media coverage. That is, so the TV people could come out and get pictures of angry veterans and little kids crying, and knowing that the media would say, well, it's all the Republicans' fault. We fellow travelers know, and you Americans out there in flyover country, you should know that as well, and you should think everything that we tell you to think. Well, did you notice when it was shut down for that brief period in 2013? Did you notice at all? Are you telling me that the BLM offices were closed? Or were they still out intimidating ranchers? Are you telling me that the EPA was closed, or were they still out intimidating ranchers and farmers? And any business person they can find, stray business person who wants to put down a new parking lot. Did you notice any changes there? I just bring this up because we keep hearing if this happens again, it's going to be the Republicans' fault once more. Why is it always the Republicans' fault when you talk to people in mainstream media? Well, if Donald Trump demands his wall, we're going to have to shut things down. Plus, he said Mexico was going to pay for it. A couple of things. He didn't say the wall was going to be built on day one, did he? It's still in the cards. So it may not happen today, tomorrow, or this month. And number two, we still don't know what type of deal. When he said he was going to make Mexico pay for it, I don't think he was thinking of sending the army into Mexico City and then walking away with the treasury. I think he had some deal in mind where once you build the wall, you put a door there and you say, all right, if you want people to come here, because since you can't take care of your own people, perhaps we work out a deal where you take care of some of the costs and the burdens while we take care of these people here whenever they get a hangnail and have to go to the emergency room. And that then pays for the wall. I think that we all understand that. But if you're listening to Chuck Schumer,
President Trump promised Mexico would pay for the wall, not American taxpayers. The idea that President Trump is fulfilling a campaign promise when he says America will pay for the wall now and Mexico will pay it back later is untrue.
There's an amazing thing. Over the last 40-some years, a woman has actually been sleeping with that. Telephone number to reach our program today, 736-0300. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, and you're on the air.
Yeah, about paying for that wall. Trump has already saved so much money on the Air Force One and some jets that he renegotiated the price that they were building. And then by not paying for all Hillary's refugees, probably millions of dollars of handouts. All that money could be put towards the wall.
Thanks for the call. I saw a story yesterday. Somebody sent me a link, and it detailed what it costs each state individually every year, what it costs, what the burden is for illegal immigrants, and probably you throw in refugees. Idaho last year, $100 million. That's in a small state, well, not small geographically, but with a small population. That's a big throw here for all of us. And again, oh, but you're being mean-spirited. Really? If I can't afford to send my own kid to college or feed them, is it mean-spirited to say that I'd like to? We have another caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Yeah, why don't we find employers to hire an illegal undocumented worker? A stiff mandatory fine of $20,000. And, that if there's no jobs here, maybe it'll stop the flow. In fact, I'm not even sure you need a wall.
Well,
probably not going to be a real popular idea in this.
So,
area,
in other words, they should go out and hire Americans who are all hopped up on heroin and meth. That's the other side of that argument. If you need to get business done, do you want to hire some meth head, or do you want to hire somebody who's at least willing to do the job?
Well, are they here illegally? I mean, that's the point. We're not talking about the drug problem.
Right. Well, we've got a lot of American workers, and unfortunately, they can't pass drug tests. And as it turns out, immigrants and refugees can. That's a sad story, but that's the truth. We've got to figure out a way to work this out with Mexico so Mexico shares the burden of bringing people here as guest workers if we can't find anybody sober enough to do the job here. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley at 948.
Bill, overlooked is the fact that building a wall will stimulate the economy since the ingredients going into powdered cement, iron ore, bauxite for aluminum, copper for wiring have to be collected and then delivered to the factories and then delivered to the site. Every one of those workers pay taxes that go into the economy, and then they can go out and buy goods from people that also pay taxes.
Well said, and that's will spur some growth in all of that. But I don't think what he meant is Mexico we were going to hold them down on the floor and make them say uncle until they gave us the cost. He planned to work out a deal with them where we would get something back from them that would cover the cost of the wall over time. I don't think that is completely absurd. Dr. Charles Krauthammer, speaking on Special Report last night on Fox News Channel, made it clear that language is framing the debate right now on the wall.
Charles, if you noticed in the sound bites, Sessions used the word barrier, Pelosi used the word wall. And I think the Democrats have cleverly tried to label it a wall. Of course, Trump himself had called it a wall.
As a candidate, yeah.
As a candidate, which I think doesn't help him. People have kind of a visceral reaction to a great big wall. Looks ugly, looks like a prison. Whereas a barrier, people accept the notion of a barrier. We have a triple redundancy barrier, meaning wires down in San Diego, which have had something like a 90% reduction in illegal immigration. The Israelis have what is part wall, part triple wire fence. And people accept the barrier idea.
So maybe just 3 long strings running side by side along the border of razor wire would do the trick. In other words, you don't have to be stacking up bricks and mortar. And you throw down some more electronic sensors too as well, so in case somebody decides to cut the wire. But if you have the sensors there, you could quickly discover somebody who was trying to do the work, and by the time they actually got near the end of it, you'd be there with some border agent to turn them back. Coming up on 9:51, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 43. We wanted to point out, too, is maybe in fairness to our caller who brought up the fact that we should be hiring Americans first, and I said too many of them have dope problems. Maybe in fairness to the caller, if they actually had the jobs, maybe they wouldn't be turning to heroin or meth to dull the pain in their lives. I will grant that. But from an employer's perspective, to go trying to put employers out of business because they hired a couple of illegal immigrants, and you put 20 other regular Americans out of work, then what? I'd like to keep those people working too. You're up next. You're on the air on Top Story.
I think we have to be consistent. The problem is nobody's willing to do the hard thing. The hard thing would be get rid of welfare, build the wall, stop people from hiring illegals, which means fining them. It's their problem too. They're breaking the law just like the people coming across the border. You have to be consistent. Otherwise, your ideas aren't legitimate to the media or anyone else for that matter.
And just keep in mind, though, because a lot of those people who are being hired, I was reading about Morgan County, Colorado the other day, which is overrun with people who are illegal immigrants who are working in the agriculture business, not just on the farms, but in the associated businesses as well. If you find the employers, you will bring it to an end. But you got to remember, you're going to have a lot of Americans out there who are then going to whine their grocery costs are too high.
So be it. It needs to be higher anyways. We're already paying an artificially low number or a dollar amount for our food. So be it. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's going to hurt to do the right thing, but you have to do the right thing regardless. That's why we're in trouble, because no one's willing to do the right thing. They're more worried about politics.
But again, it's all, I agree with you. The problem is trying to sell it to most Americans, because a lot of Americans out there, they're just looking for the easy button any longer.
And we have the right guy in the White House right now. He can actually do it, though, because he's immune to all the regular
he is
confines of what we. It's kind of crazy, but it's time to do it. We need to do it. The hard thing needs to happen.
I thank you for the call. I agree that Trump doesn't really care what anybody says about him, and he's just and he it reminds me a little bit in one sense of Ronald Reagan, and the comparisons sometimes are a little bit overblown between the two. But Reagan, when he brought down to end stagflation from the Carter years, nearly ended his political career after just one term in the White House. But he was willing to try and do it, and by the time 1984 came along and it was time for re-election, the economy had improved. But he realized it might take longer than that, and he was willing to sacrifice a second term in order to save the country. At 9:54 right now, Bill Cawley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. It's 41. I have this from Eric Erickson at theresurgent.com, and he says, I find myself cheering on a government shutdown, if only to give the GOP a chance to show how much of the government sustains itself. But this is what, with my last caller, what I was referencing. Paragraph number 2, Erickson writes, we have reached a point where polling shows more Americans than ever want a giant, robust government doing all sorts of things. That is a terrible position to be in as we sail past $20 trillion in national debt. And I mentioned Americans are looking for that easy button. Look, I have to admit, I love my job, and I get up for it every morning, and I love going to my job. The only drawback is I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to do it. And I had another talk show where I used to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to do it. I don't enjoy that part of it, because even on weekends, you can't stay up. I might get to 8:30 before I fall asleep in a chair. And you're up early on Saturday and Sunday mornings, and once you do the laundry and vacuum the house and the dishes and all of those things and have your breakfast, and then it's still only 4:30, 5 o'clock, it's not fun. And so I would be looking for the easy button if I could. If I could press an easy button and the Keebler elves would do all of the show preparation for me, and all I had to come in here and do was read off a script they prepared, and they had all the editing of the sound bites done and all of that, wouldn't that be just great? Maybe the government should do it for me. But see, there's the thing. I don't think the government should be doing it for me. The worst part of my job, I am not, look, I've had factory jobs, farm jobs, I've done all of those things. And I'll tell you right now, this is sure easy. But if there's a drawback in it, it's the hours you keep. And looking at that, I realize that's part of a sacrifice I have to make. But there are a lot of people out there who go to work every day doing some really, really difficult jobs because they feel they need to do it for their families. But when you start thinking that government is your mommy and daddy, then culturally we're done. Culturally we're done. I was listening to these guys talk the other day about robotics taking over the planet and how it could eliminate, 80 to 90% of the jobs that Americans and people all over the world currently hold. I don't know that robotics is coming to certain African republics. It may be a long time, so they'll still be eking out a living trying to dig into the dirt and just, eat a few gourds, whatever they can find. But one of these authors was saying, so we're going to have to give everybody a guaranteed income. How can you even afford that? Well, we'll just take money that we're saving from robotics. And no, that's not going to work because people are going to be investing more and more money into new robotics for efficiencies and the like. But that mindset, Krauthammer said on one of these TV shows a few weeks ago that the polling data shows Americans now think health care is a right. It's not listed anywhere in the Constitution, but we've bred generations of people now who think that easy button is out there and that government just, I'll never forget doing man on the street interviews when I was a young reporter, and it showed you, for instance, that they really didn't know the conditions they were dealing with, and they'd complain about everything under the sun, and then they'd say, government's got to do something. Well, why does government always have to do something? Are there no other choices that people are aware of anymore? Well, that's it for today. I've got to mention quickly again, John Ransom joins us in hour number 2 of the program tomorrow. He's one of the economics editors at townhall.com. He also is a syndicated talk radio host. He's going to be talking about a new book he's written, which if you're thinking about planning for the future and your children's future, you might want to hear. That'll follow 9 o'clock news. Tentatively, Raul Labrador with us at 8:15 tomorrow morning and Dr. Jonathan Tripp at 8:30. God willing, the creek don't rise. They'll allow me to come back and do this all over again tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. We're at 42. Rush Limbaugh will follow the news at 10 o'clock. It's Sean Hannity's program. By the way, Eric Erickson wrote really nice things about Hannity, saying he'd be the last guy to ever be involved in a sexual harassment case. Didn't have time for that today. Hannity after 1 o'clock news today. Glenn Beck following the news at 4 o'clock. Dave Ramsey from 7 until 10 o'clock tonight here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com.